Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We'll be chatting to you about selling your university or your college to prospective international students. You've got me here, I'm Lucy, I'm the VP of our University Services study, and I'm joined here by my colleague Tom, who's VP of University Partnerships. Quick run through of the agenda. First, we'll take a look at the student journey from a sales perspective. Secondly, we'll look at prioritising the beginning of your sales process. So that initial outreach to different sources of student inquiries. Then we'll go through some sales skills generally that we've then identified as being applicable to higher education. And to finish, we'll give you a brief summary of how we can help. As always, please answer our poll that's running at the bottom of the screen on the tab called polls. And if you'd like to ask a question, please use the ask a question button that's down there as well, or use the chat box. That would be great. And over to Tom.
Thanks, Luce. So first and foremost, we thought, and what we do with our partners here at Study is really looking at your international student journey from a student perspective and understanding the different stages they've got to go through and making sure that we remove as many roadblocks as possible between those stages. Now, every university is going to have a different student journey. We're aware of that, but we think these steps here are largely going to be every university is going to have them, and really what we're looking at is the movement in between these different stages, whether we can remove those roadblocks. So if a student is a pre-inquiry, they're looking at your marketing, maybe they're visiting your website, how do we smoothly get them into being an inquiry, leaving their details so that we've got them on our database? At that point, how can we seamlessly nurture them, take them through those communications through to the point of becoming an applicant, completing that, getting all their documents sorted, how quickly are we giving them their admissions decisions, how are we incentivizing those to accept those offers, and then the onboarding process of the visas, travel arrangements, things like that. And then obviously there's the orientation and support once the student arrives, and you could then there is obviously ongoing retention that you would be doing with those students too. But for the sake of this webinar, we're just going to be looking at up to the point of orientation and support. So if we then take a look at that as a sales process, we can see that there's a lot of similarities in that student journey as a sales process. And we've got the prospecting at the start when they're a pre-inquiry. Then you're looking at making contact, qualifying the lead, taking that through the nurturing, presenting your offer, handling the objections, and then maintaining that relationship through to the close where we get the students to actually turn up. So it's really important at this point to stress what we're not saying here is that you have to aggressively call students, try and cold call them, badger them and convince them to come to your university if it's not certain, but that they want to do that. What we're saying is this is likely to be the second most expensive thing that this student ever buys other than their house. And so commensurate with that, we think that they deserve a level of customer support that they would get if they were making that kind of purchase. So it's really important that we guide the students really seamlessly down this journey. So if we think about the start of the journey at Study, we think this is one of the most important stages. How are we prioritizing students that are beginning, that have become an inquiry? So there's a number of different types of inquiry that will come through. So we're just going to look at a couple of those now. Virtual fairs, obviously, up until a couple of months ago, this would have just said fairs, but we've had to pivot, as everybody has. And a lot of companies have done very successfully had online virtual fairs. I think what's important to recognize here is that there's very different levels of engagement. So whether or not that student is just a student that was on an attendee list, whether it was at a passing chat, or whether it was a very in-depth one-to-one conversation, you'll want to qualify the students based on that and prioritize them with regards to your follow-up. So it's really important that you make sure that you understand how engaged that student is at that point. If we're looking at lists, we have a number of partners that we work with they buy list from. We've used TOEFL as an example here, but you there's College Board, various other companies, SAT, that you can get those lists from. What's really interesting here is that what you really need to think about is you obviously can search for students that have a certain TOEFL score, which is great because you know they're going to meet that kind of requirement, or whatever the company is. But often they've taken that exam with a university in mind. So this is very much a cold call. And if you are buying these lists, we have to expect that if you're getting the students on the phone, or if you're sending them emails, you are going to have a lower yield, because a lot of those students will already have decided where they're going to go, and they've never thought about your university. And then we've got third-party lead generators, which very common, most people use. And actually this was what as a company we were doing 5 or 6 years ago, until we moved to more of an online agency model almost. And you need to realize with third-party lead generators, this is very top of the funnel stuff. You must know what you're buying. There's no point in buying leads and then complain about the fact you haven't had enrollments. It's the university's role to convert those students. So you're going to have to work very hard with these students. And often it's going to be an 18-month journey. They're not going to be quick wins, and you're going to have to guide them and try and keep them hot during the whole of that, keep them engaged during the whole of that journey. So finally, website inquiries. Now at Study, we think this is where we really want universities to focus a lot of their time. If a student has organically found their way to your university website and they're looking around at your pages, we know that student is further down the funnel than a lead. And so what we really want to do is capture that student's data, have their contact details, so that we can get in touch with them and say, hey, I can see that you were interested and you were looking around. Have you got any questions? They might have more specific questions. But what's very interesting from our research is that we've noticed that a lot of universities just have the admissions email address there, and students are reluctant to often send an email to that, because they might not be confident writing in English, in prose. It might be that they think their questions might impact on whether or not they get accepted for their application if they ask a stupid question. So what we encourage our partners to do is to look at embedding contact forms, embedding chatbots, which obviously we help them with, in order to make sure that it's really easy for that student to fill that details in. We can't express enough how important it is that if a student is looking around your website, you want their details so you can begin trying to convert them down the funnel. So now Lucy's just going to have a little look at some of the sales skills required for this.
So we wanted to share with you the research we have done into lead conversion in sales generally, to see then what findings we could apply to our industry. So the first skill in sales is speed. This graph shows really the science behind the speed in sales. So research shows you should always respond to leads immediately. The graph shows the improvement on lead conversion rates versus when you respond over a period of 1 minute to 24 hours. It shows that you're 100 times more likely to successfully contact a lead if you respond within 5 minutes, and 21 times more likely to qualify that lead. We found this research really interesting and have based parts of it on our outreach to students. But we're really aware as well that obviously those first few minutes of a student submitting an inquiry to you, to us, the student is already partly sold on your university. So it's really important to capture that student whilst they're in that mindset. So now on to how many times you should contact a lead in sales. So research shows that 6 is the magic number. So 93% of converted leads are contacted by the 6th call. So have a think about how many times you personally reach out to students over the phone. And really the advice is not to give up. So, we have to remember there is no cold calling in higher education, as the student has inquired to you first, especially through those website inquiries. Let's have a look at email attempts in sales generally. So leads that are sent emails in between phone contacts, so on the right-hand side image, they have a 16% higher chance to be converted by phone, contacted by phone, sorry. Start thinking about if your strategy includes phone and email, and over what time frame is that? So they're suggesting here as a general sales approach, 22 days. So just a quick recap about speed. Making a call within a minute of receiving a lead increases conversion rates by 391%. 90% of the leads that convert are contacted in 6 or fewer calls, and inquiries who are sent emails in between phone outreach have a 16% higher chance to be contacted on the phone. So now Tom is going to have a look at how we can convert that sales speed into higher education.
Sorry, on mute. So we've noticed that a lot of our partners and a lot of universities at the moment are looking at ways in which they can increase the speed of how they respond to their students. People know that it's something that needs looking at, and so one of the best ways to do that is obviously to embed a chat tool. We've been working with a number of our partners on embedding our chat tool currently. And obviously, we've noticed a real increase in universities wanting to look at that. What's really interesting in our research is that 47% of students are saying that they would like a self-service chat tool, but actually only about a quarter of students are saying that it's available. So while we know universities are looking at growing the use of this, it still isn't where students want it to be. Interestingly, when we look at obviously we recently did a webinar on Generation Z students and how to engage with them, and what was really interesting out of that was that these students are growing up with instant access to information, and they're used to getting their questions answered immediately. So it's really important that we're keeping up with these trends and making sure that we are answering students as quickly as they would like. Obviously, as a company, we as a tech-driven company, we're always looking to improve our own response times and testing that against to make sure that we're hitting those optimum timeframes. So some of the things that we've learned that you could look at implementing in your own universities within 10 hours was a good time frame for following up with students. Now, this specifically is in terms of our phone calls that we're making to students, and we've noticed that after 12 hours the response rate falls significantly. Now, what this means in reality, really, if you think about it, is that you've got to hit that student before they go to bed. And once they've gone to bed and it's the next day, the likelihood of getting a response from them really falls significantly. You've got to get them in that moment. The optimum time frame obviously is within minutes, but we realize this isn't scalable. We're able to do that because we have a large team of advisors and things like chatbots and stuff. But we do realize that for a lot of universities, it just isn't realistic to hit those students within minutes unless they get outside help. So over to Lucy to go through some of the some more of the skills that you could look at growing through your team.
So apart from speed, there are other skills to try and learn. So active listening skills. So basically, how many times do you catch yourself listening to someone, but also thinking about what you're going to be having for dinner tonight? And it probably happens to everyone. Our minds are very busy places. So you and your team could try to become a bit more present by using these active listening skills. So such as paraphrasing back to the student when you're chatting to them, reflecting back to them, summarising at an end of a call when you're speaking to them. And by using these techniques, the student will really feel like you're listening to them, that you're interested in helping them, and you're being very genuine. The decision to study abroad obviously is an emotional one. So remember to communicate with empathy as well. So that really means kind of putting yourself in that in the student's shoes when you're talking to them. Watching your body language, even on Zoom calls, and make sure you're making good eye contact as well. So being a team which is results orientated is very important. So within your team, you could introduce KPIs, so key performance indicators. So that's like measuring the number of phone calls, the number of apps, the number of admitted students. So although you might be already tracking them as a team or as a university as a whole, it might be a good idea to set them individually. So you can see who might then need further support. And it's also a good idea to break those different things up into smaller chunks so you can actually achieve those targets. Introducing a more sales-oriented approach within the team means that all team members know they are selling the university, and then understanding the importance and significance of how their daily job really impacts the university as a whole. So this approach, seeing that bigger picture, is really motivating for teams. It's also important to use a variety of questioning skills, particularly open-ended questions, like how do you feel when you think about studying abroad? This will enable you to tap into the emotions of the students, their feelings, what makes them tick, what's important to them. So then you can clearly explain how your university can meet their needs and their wishes. Challenging questions have to be dealt with sensitively and at an appropriate time, of course, and not during the initial conversations with the students, so you don't push that student away. But they are useful once you have built rapport, so obviously motivate that student and encourage them to the next part of the student journey. Objection handling, so that's a great way of handling objections is to frame your answer within a story. So in sales, you call that kind of storytelling. Imagine you're on campus, or imagine you're in your online lecture, it's your first day. If the student can then picture themselves on campus on that online lecture, they can then more easily understand the benefits of choosing your university. Always be open and honest and transparent, of course, with the students, which will then build trust and a stronger rapport with that student. If all the other skills have been used appropriately, closing the student and getting that verbal yes that they will be enrolling should be simple. So in sales, there is a term called always be closing, which means throughout all the communication that you have with the students, you are successfully at all those different points and settling any doubts that they have. So you can then start doing trial closes, such as like an example of saying, if you get your IELTS result, your English language result next week, will you be submitting your application soon after? So it's always important not to rush the student, but give them plenty of encouragement. So over to Tom to explain a bit about how we help.
Perfect. Thanks, Lucy. So, yeah, I mean, we were just conscious that some people might be listening to this webinar and go, well, that's all well and good, Tom and Lucy, but we're a team of one and we just haven't got the resources for this. So just to give you an idea of how at Study we help our partners with this, these are some of our numbers in terms of what we're doing on a monthly basis in order to help with those conversions. So you can see, and we won't go through all of them, but I think the most important and interesting one here that we have found during this journey is just how many touch points on the bottom right it takes to take a student from a stranger to an enrollment. And they're not all emails, they're not all phone calls, and that's across every medium. But it's really interesting. Often we have to bring parents in as part of those touch points as well. And so we help our partners by firstly looking at their website, helping them to make sure that they're generating as many inquiries as possible, and then to guide those students right down the journey, working alongside our partners' teams. With our advice center, calling students, emailing them, WhatsApping, and really helping out in that student journey wherever we can. So it's something to be aware of. It's an option that there are companies that can help with this, especially our chatbot and things like that are really interesting at the moment. And lots of universities are having conversations with us about that. You can have a look at this information in your own time. And I'd welcome the opportunity to have a chat with any of you, not just necessarily about our service, but this as a topic is something that we feel very passionately about. So even if it's just you wanted to pick our brains on any aspects of this webinar, then we'd love to have a chat with you about that.
So now for the webinar poll results. So if you haven't done so already, just pop down to the bottom, if you wouldn't mind, please, and answer our 3 poll questions. I'll just give you a few more seconds to do that before we give you the answers. Okay, looks like the results are now coming in. They're changing fast. Right, let's go. So how long does your institution normally take to get back to international student inquiries? 14% said within 12 hours. 60% said within 24 hours. Sorry, they're changing already. Actually, 25% said 48 hours plus. So the majority of the people on this webinar are getting back to students within 24 hours. So do you have any comments on that?
No, I think that's really good, and we can see that somebody gets back within 12 hours as well, which is great. I think it suggests that the people joining us understand that there's a need for speed to get back to the students, but aren't necessarily using chatbots because realistically, in order to hit the within minutes stage, you're going to have to embed some technology through that website. But I think it's good to see that the majority are hitting that 24-hour window. That's really cool.
So do you have KPIs within your team? So the majority of people, 87% of people on this webinar said no, actually. And so I know you've got your thoughts on KPIs. We've both had them, haven't we, at previous companies?
Yeah, KPIs are really controversial, and you know, from a sales team perspective, people tend to really hate them. I actually kind of differ from that opinion. I think they're really useful, and the purpose of KPIs is not to say, hey, we've got this team, we want you to be busy. We think if you make 40 calls a day, that will be a good output. It's really about using the data to understand how many calls, how many meetings you need to book in order to hit that target. So you almost work back. You look at, okay, in order to get an enrollment, I know that I need to speak with X number of universities to the application stage. I know that to get that number of applicants, I need to speak with this number of students at the start of the stage. And then that can really help you to identify how many emails you should be sending, how many phone calls and things like that. So I think it's really cool that someone is using KPIs, because we don't come across that very often at all here, and it is such a common thing in the sales process, and that suggests that someone is really getting ahead of the curve in terms of looking at that as getting the students across the line as a sales process, which again is pretty encouraging.
Do you have a customer service approach to student recruitment? It was good. 62% of people on this webinar said yes, they do have a customer service approach. So that ties in really nicely with the result that you are getting back to students within 24 hours. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much for answering that. So does anyone have any questions? Let's have a look here. Okay. So the first question is there a part of the student journey that is the most important? That's from Jen on the webinar.
Okay, cool. Good question, Jen. I think as far as we're concerned at Study, we think you need to be looking at every single roadblock and making sure that you're trying to help students through it. If I was forced to choose one area, then it would be that very first touch point. So if you think about the journey as an international student, you go online, you've got, especially now, so many different websites and options to choose from in terms of where you can inquire. And so that student's probably inquired to 10, 15 universities. And really, you want to be the university that stands out from the crowd there. Everybody uses a CRM system now. That student's probably getting an automatic email within 24 hours, as we can see from our poll results from the majority of universities. But actually, if you can be the university that reaches out in a different way, maybe a phone call, maybe WhatsApp, maybe you've got some sort of clever way of reaching out on social media or something, it's just going to set you aside from the other universities that student's looking at, and they're going to go, I'm going to be treated so well here because they really care about me. So for me, I think it's that very first stage. It's worth spending extra time on getting that right, because once they're super engaged and in that pipeline, then you can get them down to that point of enrollment.
Yeah. We have another question as well. In your experience or opinion, if a student has left their number, would you use Messenger or WhatsApp rather than a call as your first quick response? I know at the moment we are reaching out to students over the phone as the quickest way to do it. However, we also are aware that 71% of students obviously are using WhatsApp daily when we've done research into it. So I think that is a great way of responding to students first of all as well. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a what you want to get is a diversity in communications. So this everybody's different in terms of whether or not they, for instance, answer the phone to a number that they don't know. I personally do. So actually, a phone call would be the best way to get in touch with me. I think when you're looking at Messenger, WhatsApp, emails, they can be ignored. So I think it's about hitting multiple channels before, like very like the slide that Lucy showed earlier, where it's phone calls intermingled with emails. Actually, if you can add Messenger, if you can add WhatsApp to that, then I think super cool. But in our opinion, phone calls are the best way to do that. I know that students will always say that they want to be contacted by email, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to do it. It means that it's the way that they would like you to do it, potentially, so they can then ignore it.
Okay. We've got our final question as well. So if the decision on your study programme is the second most expensive purchase in your life, after buying a home, like Tom suggested, how is it possible that the response rate after the inquiry falls so quickly? Wouldn't it be more likely that if you have placed an inquiry, you'd be more responsive even after a couple of days, assuming that you've already placed the inquiry because you really are interested in that institution programme? I think with that, obviously, I'll do my comments first and then over to Tom. I think for us, it's about, with that student, it's about wowing them with the customer service first, although it's the competition with other universities, obviously. That we'll be getting back to them as well. And if we can wow them right at the beginning, they might be then more susceptible, obviously, to talking to us, rather than another university. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, again, it's another very good question. I think it's a useful analogy, the buying a house, when it comes to the costs. Obviously, there are differences in process. I think the main difference being that you don't apply to multiple houses. You're just going to buy one. So it's worth remembering that like we've mentioned a couple of times, this student has probably inquired to multiple universities. They've then received emails from all of those universities, and so the step actually that was worth looking at when we talk about buying a house is probably the point at which you choose which real estate agent you're going to go with. So it's really actually the real estate agent that's going to get your business is the one that works hardest for your business, and that's kind of the same. That's kind of the same as here, and you would expect to see a drop off there in terms of whether or not you engage with that real estate agent. So I think it's a really good question. The processes are obviously slightly different, but the reason for that drop off is that they have so many options, and there are other universities in the hunt for that student as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for people who have submitted those questions. We always want to make sure that obviously our webinars are 30 minutes, so you guys, we don't eat up into too much of your day, but then you get some good takeaways as well. If you'd like to chat further to us, Tom would welcome that. He heads up our conversion service, so you can email him at tom@study.com. And thank you so much for joining our webinar, and we'll see you on the next one as well. Bye-bye.